The elements of style won't just ruin your writing. It'll ruin your life. I've seen way too many writers lose opportunities and confidence by rigidly following the writing rules in style books like Strunk and White's. Because if you're hiding behind writing rules, then you'll never find your voice. So in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how to move beyond these harmful writing rules to 4 principles that'll help you discover the authentic voice inside you. You know, the one that builds audiences, influence, and genuine connection with your readers. Oh, and by the way, I'm William. I spent 10 years as an English professor in South Korea, and now I help writers sharpen their ideas and reach serious readers. So if that sounds like you, then be sure to grab my free newsletter, Writer Science. Link is down below the like button. To be clear, I'm not knocking all the style tips in the elements of style. Honestly, when I think of those style tips, I'm reminded of the way that the Earth is described in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Mostly harmless. Sure, some of their style advice feels a little empty. Like, be clear. I mean, who's gonna argue with that? Some of their writing advice is a little obvious, like, don't explain too much. Because, yeah, too much literally means you've already crossed the line. And some of their advice, like their famous omit needless words, is basically useless. I mean, if beginners knew which words were needless, they wouldn't need the advice in the first place. So sure, laying out these good-intentioned reminders isn't really going to hurt anyone. Even the really silly stuff, like do not inject opinion, doesn't really cause much trouble. I mean, have you ever tried stopping writers from giving their opinions? It's pretty much impossible. Plus, sometimes opinions are exactly what we're looking for. But like I say, none of these style tips are cause for great concern. But here's the rub. Despite having style right there in the title, this book isn't actually about style. It's about grammar. And that's where the real trouble starts. Because when it comes to grammar, the writing advice isn't just questionable, it's downright harmful. For many English-speaking writers today, The Elements of Style is pretty much their only grammar textbook. And given how terrible some of their grammar advice is, that's honestly a tragedy. So while the style suggestions might slightly improve your writing, if you can manage to make sense of any of them, the writing rules actually make things worse. Take their classic writing advice to use the active voice. Sounds like pretty good advice, right? I mean, who doesn't want their writing to be active and vigorous? But let's pause for a second, because there's something weird about their argument here. To back up this advice, Strunk and White give us 2 example sentences. There's the active one, I will always remember my first trip to Boston. And the passive one, my first visit to Boston will always be remembered by me. And for sure, the passive version sounds awkward, but here's the real question. Is it awkward because it's passive? Or is it awkward because they've deliberately chosen an unnatural example? Think about it this way. Imagine you're at a restaurant and you've just paid the bill. If you turn to your friend and say, the bill was paid by me, that sounds pretty weird. Not because it's passive, but because you're placing yourself at the end of the sentence. Now, the end of the sentence is known as the stress position, and more on that in just a second. But for now, just notice that writing the sentence in this way gives yourself a special kind of emphasis, and that's awkward because you're already part of the conversation. You're sitting there in the restaurant. But now, what if you order at a restaurant, but the person ahead of you has done one of those pay it forward things? So the cashier turns to you and says, oh, the bill was paid for by the last customer. Suddenly, the passive voice sounds perfectly natural, even elegant. Do you see what's going on here? Strunk and White are stacking the deck. They're choosing awkward examples on purpose to make passive sentences look weak and awkward. But the passive voice itself isn't inherently bad. It's all about how and when you use it. So if the passive voice isn't always evil, as Strunk and White would like you to believe, then the question is, when should you use it? And for that, there are basically 5 situations in which you should use the passive voice. First, you should use the passive voice, or the passive voice should be used by you, when you want the sentence to focus on the thing that got acted upon. The subject position is like a spotlight, so if you want to bring the reader's attention to the thing that receives the action of the verb, use the passive voice. Second, use the passive voice when the actor just doesn't matter. For example, the young couple were married on a warm summer's day. The action of the verb marry was performed by some authority like a judge or a priest, but the actor doesn't really matter. The sentence is more interested in the young couple and the warm summer's day. So the passive voice is perfect here. Third, the passive voice is perfect for when the actor is unknown. In the sentence, my wallet was stolen, well, we don't know who stole the wallet. If you followed Strunk and White's writing rules, then you'd have to use an empty subject, like someone stole my wallet. But the passive voice allows you to leave the unknown actor out of the sentence entirely. For this reason, politicians love the passive voice because it allows them to talk about mistakes without explicitly saying who is responsible for those mistakes.
There may be a situation here in which a serious mistake was made.
Clearly, mistakes were made.
There were mistakes made.
Fourth, think about this. At award shows, why do you think they always say something like, and the award goes to Al Pacino, and not Al Pacino won the award? As you might have guessed, there's a certain emphasis that comes at the end of the sentence, which is why it's known as the stress position. And the passive voice is great for whenever you want to put an important word in that stress position at the very end of the sentence. And finally, sometimes the passive voice simply sounds better. Imagine saying, writing rules are meant to be broken. That's the passive voice, and it sounds way better than the awkward active version. Someone means for you to break writing rules. If you, the writer, decide that the focus should be on the action or the recipient rather than the doer of the verb, then the passive voice can actually be a great writing tool. And that's the key to great writing, understanding it not as a list of rules, but a set of tools. Unfortunately, Strunk and White have influenced generations of bad writers and grammar Nazis. I mean, have you ever been scolded by a teacher or even by Microsoft Word's grammar checker for using the passive voice? You know those red circles and squiggly green lines telling you that your writing is weak? Well, you can thank Strunk and White for that one. But the truth is, although these writing mavens warned writers to never use the passive voice, they didn't even know what they were talking about. Nevertheless, thanks to the success of their book, The Elements of Style, this misguided advice has been followed dogmatically by English teachers and uninformed writers, and the worst part is that style advice has now been baked into grammar checkers and AI writing tools. Let me show you what I mean. In the section where Strunk and White advise writers to use the active voice, they give 4 examples of passive sentences. But guess what? Only one of them is actually passive. See if you can spot it. At dawn, the crowing of a rooster could be heard. There were a great number of dead leaves lying on the ground. It was not long before she was sorry that she had said what she had. The reason that he left college was that his health became impaired. So, did you spot the passive voice? Let me show you. It was actually the first one. This one is really passive, but the other 3 examples are not the passive voice. Number 2 is not the passive. Here we just have a descriptive sentence. Number 3, that's not passive. It's just a straightforward past tense sentence. And number 4 seems passive because of impaired, but it's actually an adjective here. Notice how we can't say a new edition became issued by the publishers because became is not a transitive verb, so it doesn't go into the passive voice. All right, grammar lesson over. Why does any of this matter? It's because misunderstanding the passive voice leads to unnecessary editing, confusion, and weaker writing decisions. You might end up changing a perfectly good sentence just because some grammar checker mistakenly corrected it. And if you're one of these people who actually uses AI in your writing, then you're going to be making these mistakes all over the place because AI cannot think. It can't make these writing decisions. So here's the good news. Identifying the passive voice is a lot simpler than you think. Just remember these two easy guidelines. At the level of grammar, the passive voice uses the verb to be plus the past participle. So you get was eaten, were built, is chosen. And at the level of meaning, passive sentences put the receiver of the action first, often omitting the doer or placing it after the verb in one of these prepositional by phrases, such as the like button was smashed by you. Why is this important? Well, knowing this difference empowers you to make your own decisions about writing and to ignore the writing rules from ill-lettered purveyors of writing misinformation like Strunk and White. Next time you're trying to make your writing more active, pause and ask yourself, am I really changing the passive voice here? Or is it just another false alarm? But I've got to say, after years of begging writers to stop following the writing rules in this book, I have found the biggest objection is that the authors of the book, Strunk and White, are themselves good writers. So it's like, who are you to say these writing rules aren't any good? Look at E.B. White. He published Charlotte's Web. And yes, I'd have to agree. E.B. White is a fantastic writer. But the reason he's a good writer is because he doesn't even follow his own writing advice. Seriously, no sooner do the authors give us a writing rule than they break it. Not over there in Charlotte's Web, but right here in their own writing advice book. In the section on clarity, they lay out rules like put statements in the positive form and write with nouns and verbs, not adjectives and adverbs. Yet immediately after stating these rules, they write sentences like this. The adjective hasn't been built that can pull a weak or inaccurate noun out of a tight place. This sentence breaks not one, not two, but 4 of their own writing rules. It's negative rather than positive. Hasn't been built. It's passive rather than active. It's overloaded with adjectives. Weak, inaccurate, tight. And it separates related words, violating their own rule of keeping related words together. But this isn't a one-time blunder. They do it again and again just a few pages later. The subject of a sentence and the principal verb, this is how I think they sound, just bear with me here, but the subject of a sentence and the principal verb should not, as a rule, be separated by a phrase or a clause that can be transferred to the beginning. Again, they break multiple rules simultaneously. We've got negative form, passive voice, adjective usage, and separated phrases. Do you see what I'm saying here? These are not isolated gotcha grammar slips. These are symptoms of a deeper issue. The authors of this book did not understand the grammar and writing that they're trying to teach. They know the terminology, they've got all the slang, words like subject, verb, phrase, but they lack the skill to consistently apply these concepts to their own writing. There are no secrets in the elements of style that will improve your own writing. A better bet is to find examples of writing that you like and practice writing it out. In the field of copywriting, this is known as copy work, where you take an effective sales letter and you practice copying it out word for word until you understand its structure and rhythm. But you can do this for just about any genre of writing. Pick an example of writing that you think is exceptional, try to commit it to memory, and then practice out writing it as much as possible from memory. If you sit there with the book open, I don't think you get as much of an effect as if you're working from your own memory. Once you start to recognize the mistakes and contradictions in writing guides like the elements of style, then your own writing can immediately become stronger and clearer. Take the infamous rule against split infinitives, placing an adverb between to and a verb, like the famous to boldly go where no man has gone before. If you ask Strunk and White, writers should avoid splitting infinitives unless the goal is specifically to emphasize the adverb. But this rule is not just outdated, it doesn't make any sense. It's wrong. All right, maybe this is getting a little bit unfair. I mean, these guys are like long since dead, and I'm just wailing on them here.
He's already dead.
But we've got to address this one because it's seriously wrong. Now, to be fair, Strunk himself never mentioned split infinitives. It was E.B. White who later introduced this unnecessary writing rule, despite admitting elsewhere that split infinitives can actually enhance clarity. Consider this sentence. The president's statements tend to completely polarize the public. Strunk and White would claim that the split infinitive to completely polarize emphasizes the adverb, but the opposite is true. If your goal is to highlight just how total that polarization is, then you would want to place the adverb at the end of the sentence in the stress position. The president's statements tend to polarize the public completely. Why does this second version feel stronger? Because, as Strunk and White correctly point out elsewhere, words placed at the end of the sentence received the greater emphasis. That's the stress position at work. So once again, they couldn't even follow their own writing advice when condemning split infinitives. The problem with the writing advice in this book isn't the split infinitives. It's misunderstanding where sentence emphasis truly belongs. Splitting infinitives is often completely natural and clear, and here's exactly how you can apply it in your own writing. If you want to tie an adverb closely to the verb, then it's totally fine to split the infinitive. But if you really want to highlight an adverb or a key idea, then place it at the end of your sentence in the stress position. Strunk and White were unable to consistently follow their own writing advice, but now you know better. So by all means, if you want to be over-opinionated and under-informed, then go ahead, enjoy Strunk and White. But if you're tired of the over-opinionated and ill-lettered grammar Nazis like Strunk and White laying down a bunch of trivial don't-do-this writing rules, then you need to watch this video next, because it's going to teach you how to cut through the rules to get a deeper understanding of how writing works, using a hilarious video from College Humor. So be sure to go check it out.